and welcome to AJ Paints. I'm Andy. In this video I'll be showing you how to paint the starter party for Maladum, Dungeons of Enveron, the board game from Battle Systems. This is the recommended party of Callan, Syrio, Moranna and Greet, the intrepid adventurers who are ready to set out into the dungeon. Maybe it's your first time painting, maybe it's not, but I'll show you a couple of techniques and some ways that you can get these miniatures straight onto your table. And here are the miniatures, straight out of the box. If you've never painted before, don't worry, I'll show you all the things that you need and hopefully get you started. First of all, you're going to need a piece of paper towel, some kind of palette and a brush. I normally use cheap nylon brushes for most of my painting work. You're also going to need some water. I like a dropper bottle, a bit of spare water and some kind of pot to wash your brushes out in. If it is your first time painting or you just want to get your miniatures onto the table quickly, I'd recommend speed paints or contrast paints. You can pick them up as starter sets like this one from the Army Painter or individual colours. I'm going to base my paint scheme around this basic set of colours. So I'll actually be using a mixture of Citadel colour and Vallejo Express colour. You can see here I've got a red, a purple, a blue, a green and a yellow. I've also got a bone colour, a yellowish leather, a flesh and a dark brown. And also a black, and this white colour. It's more opaque than the other contrast style colours, but it's a really useful addition to your set. As well as the contrast paints, I'm using just 4 of these basic colours here. Dark green, dark red, a dark greenish blue, and those are my base colours. And then for the highlights, I'm just using ice yellow on the left here. So the first thing you should do is wash your miniatures in a slightly soapy solution, water, and then get into removing mould lines. Now you don't really need to do this. If you've got some really egregious ones like this big lump on Sirio's cloak, then scrape them off with a hobby knife and get the worst of them off. Sometimes they're a bit tricky, but it's doable. Next you might want to fix some bent parts. Sometimes things like the sword here on Callan, or in my case Sirio's arrow here, can come out of the moulds bent. They're the bases as well. You can dip them in hot water, just tap, hot tap water is fine, or I prefer to use a hairdryer, heat the parts up, hold them in place for a couple of seconds or dip them in cold water and they'll be absolutely fine. We'll need an undercoat to go to undercoat your miniatures. I like to use that Vallejo surface primer. I've tested this with just cheap black craft paint and it works reasonably well. The surface primer dries really nicely, you can slap it on like I'm doing here and it gives you an excellent base to work from. You can see I stuck my miniatures to a bit of plastic just to paint them all at the same time. Here they are, undercoated, primed, ready to go. Now you can just hold the miniatures by the base while you're painting, but I prefer to use a painting handle. I've got a slightly expensive one, but as you can see here, you can use anything as long as you can hold it in your hand. I use a bit of blue tack just to hold the miniatures onto the tops. And we're off to our first stage. So I like to get a coloured base coat on here, base layer. The contrast paints work really nicely on light colours, whites and greys, but I think they look a bit cartoony when you do that, so I prefer to start from something like this. Syrio and Moranna, I'm using a bluish green here. Sirio's got that bluish skin and Moranna's a slightly pale looking character. And I'll move on to different colours for Callan and Greet. I'm using Hull Red, it's quite a rich browny red that, and Caliban Green, just a dark green for Greet. You'll have noticed I'm using a different brush here. This is just a cheap makeup brush, a small one, just a couple of pounds for that, and it does a fantastic job of getting the colour on quickly. You don't want to load your brush up too heavily though. And that leads us nicely into the next stage. This is dry brushing, so you don't want very much paint on your brush. I tend to tap it off on a bit of kitchen paper with a bit of water on it so it doesn't get too dried out. I'm making sure to brush this light ice yellow colour mostly from the top. I'm focusing on things like the face and the chest, but I want to make sure that I've got a light coating all over so that when I put my thinner contrast paints on, it really picks up the colours and it also picks up those highlight areas. You can see here from working on Greet and Moranna, Greet I'm really chucking it on there. You'll see that although I am putting some on the feet and some of the undersurfaces, the focus is really on the top. I'm imagining a light shining down from the top left hand side just to add some value and give some volume to the miniature. dry brushing done, we're ready for the next stage. You can see Syrio and Moranna here with the bluey green, Greet with the green, and Callan with the red base. I like to work from reference images when I'm painting. This is the official artwork, and here are the beautifully painted minis from the rulebook. You can see we've got some muted colours going on here. I'm going to start off with the skin, just using a bone colour. I think this is pretty much neatly applied, and you'll be able to tell as soon as you start putting it on where all those shadows are that we've created using the dry brushing method from earlier. It just works really beautifully. And I also used that bone to pick out some of the details on the pack. There's a lot of stuff going on that pack, so it makes sense to get some different colours on there. For the cloth, I'm using a purpley colour here, a bit watered down, and just brushing that straight onto those cloth areas. Then for the red I've got is very intense, so mixing some flesh in with it and a little bit of water helps to tone that down. I don't want that cartoony finish, I want something a bit more subtle. You'll see the effect of the highlights really beautifully on these straps where we've got those nice edges picked out already for us. So moving back now to another bluish colour, this time, well, blue, with a tiny bit of purple into it, because again it's a very intense colour, just on the bedroll here. You can thin these paints down with water, or most of the paint companies provide some kind of medium which is specifically designed to work with their paint. I use water, it's cheaper. So this is the first outing for our white colour, and you can see here mixed in with the bone, it's much more opaque. You can see it looks different to the skin, and that was the point here. I wanted to make sure that these armbands stood out separately from the skin. Now this green, this is Vallejo Express green, it's very, very intense. As I was putting it on I realised how intense it was, needed a bit of watering down. And this, just a bit of flesh here, brings the face to life, just a little bit in the ears. I put some on the mouth. I tried to put a bit of red on there, it looked ridiculous, so I washed it off. The flesh colour doesn't have to just be for flesh though. Here I'm using it for the bottle tops on the back of the backpack. There's such a lot going on here, as I said earlier. The more colours you can put in there, the better. Making the skin seem a bit more lively, just as I did on the ears. Toes and fingers with a bit of that flesh colour really helps out. Now for these ones, bottles, a mixture of green and blue, just get it so that it looks good. Depends on how intense your colours are. And again, breaking up all those details on the backpack, making them look interesting. Here I'm using the white to desaturate the green a little bit, just for that pillow on the back there. With fantasy miniatures, there's a lot of leather and wood, and we want to try and distinguish the different bits. I'm using snakebite leather here, which is quite a yellow one. If yours isn't as yellow, you might want to mix some in. I'm also using it for the metal sections here, just for the brass bits on the chest. Of course, you could replace these with metallics if you want to. I'm doing the same here, just on the bottom of her little mace and on some details there. So moving into now this lovely dark brown. This is Wildwood or Witchwood, I can't remember what it's called, from Citadel. You can mix your own. If you get a leather colour, mix a bit of black into there, you'll get that nice dark brown. But again, I'm trying to break up the stuff on the back there and make sure that this is distinguished from the other different parts, the other browns that I've got on the miniature already. Black, one of the most useful speed paints that I have. Mine's mostly run out now. Quite often do metals with black, sometimes mixed with a little blue. And that is Greet done. It took me about 35 minutes to put the colours on. Let's move on to the next one. Back to the official artwork for Callan, the most vanilla of heroes. He's a dude with a sword and he's going to chop things up in the dungeon. So I'm going to start off with the furs on his shoulders. I've used this white, the grey colour, just straight out of the pot. Later on I put a bit of black into it as well, just to make it a bit darker, a bit more interesting. Moving on to his trousers, that's bone colour and black. It's going on pretty thin here. I ended up putting a couple of coats on just to make it look decent. Just go with what looks good. Once I've got a colour mixed up, I like to use it on a few different bits. You can see here on the handle of the axe that he's got on his back. Now we've got a slightly different colour, so I've got flesh plus bone plus black here to make it slightly warmer. Just these bits of leather on the underskirt coat thing that he's got just above his legs there. Adding the flesh tone just warms up that greyish colour, and I quite liked it, so I stuck it on his shoes as well. Straight bone for the undershirt, not much to say there, painted on. I quite often do this while I'm working, especially with contrast paints. I had some bone on the brush, so I put a little bit more on his shoes. So the green is an important colour on this miniature. Everything up to now has been pretty neutral, and this gives us a good splash of colour. But as I said before, that green is incredibly intense. So this is mixed with a tiny bit of white and a tiny bit of water. If it's a bit too thin, you can just wait until it's dried and add on another layer. The water makes it nice and easy to brush into the gaps. And you can see here, just putting another layer on makes the colour just a little more intense, but not too much. Working from inside out, sort of bottom upwards, allows me to paint the finer details later. And just now I've gone back to the leg wraps because I wasn't happy with the colour and the arm wraps. I noticed on the artwork they were slightly purple, so mixing a little bit of purple in there helps. Now onto the flesh. He's looking reasonably tanned here. It's quite a strong flesh tone, and the pre-shading that we've done helps us out with that. And then onto his hair, dark brown. Again, if you don't have a dark brown, then mix a little bit of black into your leather, and that will help to frame his face. I've spoken already about getting a variety of tones in your leather, so using that dark brown, just going for the belts that he's got around his middle. And now moving on to the red. This is just red. I've watered it down a little bit for the same reasons as with the green. I don't want it too intense, too vibrant, but it's a striking bit of colour on the Callan miniature, and really helps to make it look good. Contrasts with the green. Back to the Citadel snakebite leather. That really yellowy colour. It stands out nicely against that darker brown of the belt, and I've just picked out a few details on the back here. And just the same as with Greet, I've applied that to the hilt and the pommel of the sword. You could replace that with a metallic gold if you wanted to. The first of my colour mistakes here should be a sort of bony, ropey colour. I made it blue, doesn't matter. Going for the axe blade, a mixture of blue and black, and I quite like that for metallics. I've done that here on the sword blade as well. Again, you could just replace that with a silvery colour, probably like a darker chainmail sort of colour. Just here, picking out some more of the leather, mixed a little bit of flesh in to warm the tone up a little bit and distinguish it slightly from the other leather colours that I've already got on there. And I don't seem to be able to stay away from these shoes. I keep chucking colours on there, so a tiny little bit, don't know what difference it made. And also putting a bit on the trousers. Warming it up, I think it helps to break those areas of colour up a little bit on the miniature, make it look nicer. And that's Callan done, and it's time to go on to Syrio. You definitely need a ranger in your party, and Syrio's a good one. We've got some greens, we've got some yellows and blues. Again, the official painted miniature looks beautiful. So going to start off with a very vibrant green that I've mixed with the green and some yellow in there as well. It's the first time I used the yellow, I think, when I was painting these miniatures, and it looks absolutely beautiful. It's so bright, it really stands out even with the finished painted mini. Just watch out for any other little bits that you can pick out. It helps to add depth to the figure. Moving on to the cloak, I mixed a flesh tone and black here, and I mixed it, I was a bit scared to put it all on, so I mixed it with quite a lot of water and thinner, and it ended up being a bit too thin. So you'll see later on in this tutorial I'll come back to this and add some more colours to make it a bit darker. Here it's getting 2 coats with a little bit of drying time in between them. So this time darkening down the bone colour to add some colour to the leather, straps on his around his feet, and the quiver on his back as well. So another mistake coming up. I was looking at his arms and I thought these wrappings went all the way up his arm, and they clearly don't when you look at the artwork. But it's super simple to fix. That is some clean water on a wet brush, and look how quickly it picks off really easily. The arrow here, straight black, no watering down or anything. I think it's important to keep that intense colour there because it's such a thin piece on the mini. And the bow, at the minute, I used this leather colour. It's quite yellow, it looks a bit goldy. It might even have a bit of bone in it, to be honest. And then the fletching on the arrow, just straight red, no dilution there. So the skin's an important tone on Syrio. The official artwork shows it blending out to more greens at the tips of the feet and things like that. I just decided to go blue-green all the way over. You just got to mix it until it looks right, really. There's not a great recipe ratio for that. My camera aim was a bit bad here, but you can see it going on the face, and it's looking pretty good, I think. It goes really nicely with that blue-green undercoat that we put on earlier. And there's Syrio basically done. There's a little bit of extra that we need to do, so I'm darkening the cloak down with that dark brown colour, thinned down a little bit because I want to control it. I don't want to lose the highlights that I've got on there, and been a bit lazy and just chucking it all over the sort of shirt thing that he's wearing as well. But the cloak's starting to look nice now, standing out against the green and the blue of his skin. You do need to be careful with these kinds of paints, especially on big flat areas like this, that they don't pool too much. So I'm doing a lot of work with the brush here, just trying to smooth it out, make sure that I don't get blobs appearing. Now I've got this dark brown colour, as seems to be the case with most of these miniatures. I get a little bit obsessed, going in and painting some shadows, picking out some little details. There's some toggles on his trousers, a couple of other bits, really to make it look more interesting. The more of these little sections that you can fill in, the better it'll look. So I've broken up his bow here, making the actual sort of a wood on the bow darker, and then leaving the lighter bits as like metallic highlights. And that's another one down. It's another roughly 30 minutes paint job. Let's move on to Moranna. So back to the official artwork again for Moranna. We can see some muted colours here, and the same on the official paint job. Although she's primaries really, she's blue and red, they are quite desaturated colours. But for the leg wraps we've gone pretty intense, just with a straight up mix of green and blue. So to desaturate the red, I mixed flesh colour into it and some water. Did a bit of messing around to make sure that I got the right mixture here, the right level of intensity. Same as with the other ones, if you start off less intense, wait for it to dry, you can add on another layer and build it up. But if you go straight in with something like, especially this Blood Angels red from Citadel, it's super intense and it ends up looking too cartoony, and we lose some of that underpainting that we did earlier. Using the white colour now to desaturate the blue a little, plus some water, and you can see you get a decent effect. Now here, that's where I make a mistake. That should be a greenish colour. I wasn't really looking at the artwork for that. I was just thinking the whole lot needs to be blue. I nearly fixed it, and then I couldn't be bothered, so I didn't. So you can see here it's important to be careful with your details, and the brush I'm using is not a tiny brush. When I first started painting lots of years ago, I used to use the tiniest brush I could find, you know, like a 5-0 or something. This one's a size 6, I believe. It really doesn't matter as long as it's got a nice point on the end. And a fatter brush will hold paint for longer, and you can paint for longer before you have to go back to the palette. Speaking of back to the palette, I went back to my red and flesh mix here, as I noticed that we had a bit of belt that I'd missed before. There's another mistake, that should be a greenish bit, but hey, never mind, it looks okay. And with that colour still on my brush, I've picked out the feathers at the end of her staff. So this is a disappointing part of the paint job, partly because my aim's really bad here and I sort of got her off the top of the frame. But you've got a lovely shot of my IKEA glass bottle that I bought for something. Don't know what it was for, but it makes an okay paint handle. The flesh over the underpainting that I put on looks a bit grim, especially on her face. So if I can be bothered, I might go back in with just some flesh colour later on, but it's tabletop, it's good enough. And dark brown for the hair here. You could use black if you wanted to be closer to the original artwork. Dark brown still on the brush, so I'm using that on her boots. It looks fine. And with the boots done, I'm just hunting for more things to colour in, and this time it's the wood on the staff. All of her jewellery gets a coat of yellow. Just want to be careful with this, it's very intense, and if you get that onto the blue, it's going to look green, it's going to stain the blue, it's going to be difficult to fix. So just be careful when you're doing that work. My camera aim is even better here. I painted a bunch of things that I thought were feathers, actually were bones. I painted them green, and then I had some green, and I decided it would be a great plan to add some to the blade. Don't really know why, maybe I thought it looked a bit magical or something, but I wet blended that anyway, so that's just some wet paint over the top of some other wet paint, pulling it down there to blend it into that blue and black mix that I used for the blade. Flesh mix plus leather just changes the colour of the little pouch there, makes it slightly different to the other thing, and I'm just adding it again to her shoes, keep adding flesh colour to the shoes. But she's done, that's it, so all that remains now is to base and varnish them. I keep my basing really simple for these miniatures. It's always P3 iron hull grey, any medium grey will do if you want to copy what I do. Some people like to cut the miniatures off the bases and add something else to them, or stick them onto 3D printed bases. I've seen some beautiful ones with texture paste, rocks glued on, whatever you like to do really, but keep it consistent amongst all your miniatures. I like to put this kind of paint on quite thin, so it's watered down. I take it off a wet palette actually, and then put 2 coats on. So you can see this is, I think this is a second coat going on to Callan's, just finishing him up. And then the final stage for me is always AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish. I really personally like the finish it gives. Some of these contrast paints, you get a slightly shiny, silky sort of finish. I don't like it. So here we go, there they are. That is our final party, all finished, done and ready for the tabletop. If this is your first time painting miniatures, then good luck, have fun, enjoy it. Don't judge yourself by other people's paint jobs, just do what you can and be proud of what you've done. If you like these and you want to see more, check out my channel. I've got videos for all of the monsters from the Maladum core set. If you've got this far, I thank you very much for watching and I'll catch you next time.